Hello folks, welcome back to another episode of Reaper Minis TV. I will be heading off to Gen Con in a couple days. Afraid I don't have a copy of Savage North to show you right now, but just about guarantee I'll have one right after I get back from Gen Con, plus a lot of Gen Con footage to show you. So for now, we'll get into some reviews. First up, we have an entry from the P65 line. This is Lard Gulp, a two-headed troll, and you can see he's carrying a spiked club in his left hand and a sword in his right hand. And as his name implies, he has two heads. One is wearing a helmet, and one of the horn pieces is broken off, but that's not a flaw in the model. It was sculpted as having broken in combat or being damaged in some way. He's wearing a mishmash of armor. There's some plate, there's some leather, there's some chain, there's just bits and pieces of junk here and there that he's wearing for armor. There's a small chest that is worn on his belt along with some heads as trophies that he's got. Also a very large hairy belly that's got some stitching in over on the right hand side where he probably got poked with a pointed stick, or where maybe somebody was trying to fight their way out after he had swallowed them. There was very little cleanup needed on the model itself. The bulk of cleaning was on the bottom of the base that needed to be smoothed out a little bit, and that's just from the casting process. He'll easily fit onto a 40mm square base if you want to do that with him. I think using him as an Etten would be great. You could also drop him into a Warriors of Chaos army for Warhammer Fantasy Battle as a troll or maybe some kind of mutated ogre, something like that, or just use him as a two-headed troll in D&D. Good figure here. Next up is a new entry in the Pathfinder line. This is the Grey Maiden. It's a single-piece miniature of a female warrior in full plate armor. She's got a large shield that her left hand is resting on, so she's really not in much of a combat pose. Her right hand sits on the pommel of a sword that is also just kind of at rest at her side. You can see there's a cape that flows a little bit around her, and the hair or plumage from her helmet is also flowing down a little bit around towards her right side. So there's a little bit of sense of motion or wind blowing across the back side of the model. Some extra detailing in the form of filigree has been sculpted onto the model on her shield and also on the breastplate and on some of the other pieces of armor. This will be probably not too hard to pick out and look good once you get her painted. There was a mold line on the underside of the right arm, but not a whole lot of other cleaning except a couple little bits of metal from the casting process, so cleaned up pretty quickly and easily. Now, the model itself initially didn't impress me so much. It seemed kind of flat, and even with the sense of wind, or sort of sense of wind, flowing across the model, it just seemed kind of flat and maybe a little bit listless to me. But then I saw a painted version of it on the Reaper site, and you can see that here, and that really changed my mind about the model. Having a good paint job can really bring to life a model that otherwise might look a little bit plain. And this one definitely started off a little bit plain in my mind, but getting to see a good paint job and some of the possibilities with the model really helped bring it into the side of me liking it a whole lot more. Okay, on to a couple of Chronoscope miniatures now. This first one is a ninja. It's a single-piece model of, as you guessed, a ninja. He's carrying a katana in two hands, kind of at the side at the ready to swipe down at somebody. He's in kind of what you or I would expect a normal ninja garb. I think he'd paint up quickly, easily, just a basic black for his clothes or maybe dark gray for his clothes, and very little flesh showing. You can see his eyes and the bridge of his nose and just part of his forehead barely under his hood there. So like I said, I think he'd paint up easily, probably not take more than a handful of minutes even to get painted. I think he'd probably take longer to get the little bit of cleaning necessary on him done and based than to paint him once you have him primed. Now the sword was prone to being bent in the package, so you'll probably have to straighten that out and just want to be careful with that. But if you have the need for a pretty simple, easy to paint up ninja figure, can't go wrong here. This next guy is Zhang Lung. He's a Chinese villain, single-piece miniature of a Chinese warlord, maybe a good pulp era villain if you wanted to use him for that. I think he could also be dropped into a superhero game pretty well as some kind of evil mastermind. He's got a monkey that he's carrying kind of cradled in his right hand, and he's reaching out with his left hand, maybe just trying to alert somebody to stop, or maybe even casting a spell at a group of player characters, something like that. The whole figure is nicely detailed without being overly detailed to where it becomes imposing to paint and looks like a really daunting task. He looks like he'd paint up pretty nicely and easily. Even if a novice painter was tackling it, I think they could get good results out of him. very nice sculpt overall. There were some mold lines across the top of the miniature, across his hat and the top side of his shoulders and his left arm that's extended, and also a little bit on the underside of his left sleeve that's hanging down a little bit. But nothing that was too difficult to clean up, nothing that marred the figure or anything like that. He does have a nice Fu Manchu style mustache, and if he wasn't carrying the monkey, I could probably say he could double as a Chinese hopping vampire. With the monkey, probably not so much, but maybe Reaper in the Chronoscope line will come out with a hopping vampire sometime in the future. Okay, on to some Dark Heaven Legends figures now, and this first one also contains a primate. It's not a monkey, but it's a baboon that comes along with an Egyptian priestess. Both of these are single-piece figures, so you get two models in this blister. The baboon is sitting on the ground, and he's cradling or holding a Noptic jar, so maybe he's the guardian that goes along with the priestess here. The baboon is sculpted well, the fur detailing is all nice, and he looks like, just after priming him, a couple of simple colors and an ink wash, and he'll be perfect and ready to go. With the priestess, she needed a little bit of cleaning. There were some mold lines on the underside of her arms and a little bit in the void between her sash and her right leg. There's a little bit of cleaning needed there, a mold line that I found, but nothing too extensive, and she was ready to go in just a couple of minutes. There's a lot of skin and not a whole lot of clothing to paint on the priestess miniature. There's some extra detailing with some ankhs that are hanging down off her belt. The staff that she's carrying has some engravings in it. Looks like an ankh. Well, the whole thing looks like a big ankh, but there's also, it looks like a cobra up at the top of it and some other detailing down at the bottom part of the head of the staff itself. So lots of nice little bits of detail to pick out here while you're painting the figure. Now, my thought here with this one is obviously you could use her in an Egyptian-themed encounter, but a friend of mine has a Tomb King's army for Warhammer Fantasy Battle. I think he could paint her up, maybe have to make her look a little more undead than a regular living priestess, but I think she would still look good in a Tomb King's army and add a little different flair to his army. And the last figure for this episode is Karal Farstep. He's a wizard, also from the Dark Heaven Legends line, and it's a single-piece miniature of a cloaked figure who's carrying a wooden staff in his right hand. His left hand is up at his belt, and he's in a relaxed but ready position. He's ready to spring into action. You can see there's a dagger on his belt, but really not any other weapons. And while he's billed as a wizard, I think he could do fine as a ranger or a druid or another character along those lines, some kind of woodsman character. I think he'd be fine used in that way. The figure needed some cleaning. There was some little bits of extra metal along the bottom half of the cloak itself from the casting process, and minor mold lines that were visible, but they were on pretty smooth surfaces, so they cleaned up without much trouble at all. Under the hood, you can see the face is really well detailed. This guy has sunken cheeks and his eyes are sunken a little bit, so very nice detailing on the face. It looks really, really good. And overall, a nice figure here. If you wanted to use him as a wizard, go ahead and use him as a wizard, but if you have a different kind of outdoorsy kind of character you want to use him for, I think he'd be perfect for that. Okay, and the last thing I wanted to tell you about before signing off for this episode and getting ready to head off to Gen Con is there's a small independent game company called Too Late Development that is putting together a Warlord computer game. I have no affiliation with them whatsoever, but I just wanted to let you know about them because it seems like a cool project they're working on. They're, like I said, working on a Warlord real-time strategy game, and they are looking for funding. It's a Kickstart funding thing they're doing. You can see the website of where to go here if you want some more information about that. And if you participate in that, you can get some cool benefits out of it, like free miniatures, free copies of existing rulebooks, free copy of the game when it comes out. So lots of cool stuff that you can do there, and you can head over to the Kickstart page here to see where they're at, and then also look at their website over here. Alright everybody, thanks for watching this episode of Reaper Minis TV. Hope to see a bunch of you at Gen Con next week, and thanks for watching. See you soon.